balance here. Not saying we ignore the physical, because obviously we have to have physical needs met. We obviously have physical wants that we want. It's about the right balance. Be concerned with the spiritual. This man's question demonstrates he was ignoring everything Jesus had just said in verse 2 to following. It wasn't like, "Whoa, I need to beware of the leaven of the Pharisees. I need to be aware of hypocrisy. I need to ensure that I don't fear man, that I fear God." No. His follow-up question is, "Hey, could you go to my brother and get half of my inheritance? Could you go do that?" Showing what his focus was on. And so Jesus jumps in. Beware of covetousness. Life is about more than what you possess. It's about more than things and what you can get. It's about being rich, as he says at the end of verse 21, being rich towards God. So what do we want to call section 2? We could give it a lot of titles. I would like to give section 2. I don't remember what we called it Sunday night. I don't have my notes in front of me of what we called it Sunday night. But there's a lot of different things we could call this. We could call this we could call it the physical versus the spiritual. The material versus the spiritual. I think that's what we call it. Material versus the spiritual. The material versus the spiritual. All right? Or we could do this. If we want to fear God, not men. Be rich towards God, not physically. I know how I was going to try to come up with a way to say it the same way, but you get the idea. Section 2 deals with the material versus the spiritual. Now, section 2, we don't have any major problems. Now this is going to lead to, hey, don't be covetous. All you could care about, things of God. Now this is going to lead us ultimately to verse 33, where he says, "Sell that you have and give alms. Provide for yourselves bags which wax not old, a treasure in the heavens that faileth not, whether no thief approacheth, neither moth corrupteth. For where your treasure is, there will your heart be also." Now that's going to refer back to it, but what Jesus is telling them to sell everything they have. Now we got to be very careful with what we do with this. I will argue that the teaching in section 2, there's no promises there that I think we have to try to figure out, wait, who is this applicable to? Who is it being said? Like we have at the end of section 1 in verse 11 and 12. I think what we have in verse 13 to 21 is a teaching that is consistent throughout the Bible. So that even if we find some things in this section that we don't think are applicable to us, some specific promises that don't seem to correspond with reality, we have a teaching in section 2 that we can all agree that is a constant teaching in the Bible. There are commands to not be covetous. God condemns covetousness. He condemns materialism. He condemns being lustful and desiring the things of this world more than the things of God. He tells us not to love the world or the things that are in the world. He tells us friendship with the world is enmity with God. That's a consistent teaching throughout the Bible. Love God supremely. Don't fall in love with the material world. Don't become preoccupied by it. Don't allow it to possess you. Now, this is a teaching that every Christian has to struggle with. Now, I think it definitely sets up section 3, but we won't get into section 3 in this live broadcast. We're going to stop. So what are some practical lessons that we can come up with here? What are some practical lessons that we can come up with in verses 13 to 21? Practical lesson number 1. You ready? Practical lesson number 1. Don't allow your preoccupation with temporal matters to blind you of spiritual truth. Don't allow your preoccupation with temporal matters to blind you of spiritual truth. Here is this man listening to God incarnate, God in the flesh, teach. He basically, it appears, to interrupt this teaching because he wants half of his inheritance. You can become so preoccupied with temporal matters, right? Temporal realities, physical matters, physical realities, that you just are blinded to spiritual truth. Spiritual truth just kind of bounces off your head and it never enters into your ear because you focus everything on the temporal. And when someone comes, wait a minute, here's some spiritual things that you should consider, you don't hear them. Temporal matters can make you spiritually deaf. Temporal matters can make you spiritually deaf. Very important principle. Very important principle. All right? That's very key. Number 2. So there's number 1. Don't allow temporal matters to blind you of spiritual truth. Number 2. Very important. Beware of covetousness. Beware of covetousness. Is there any covetousness inside of you? What are you coveting? Now, what you covet is typically temporal things. What is it? Now, you can say, I don't covet. You have to be honest with yourself. You may need to do a word study on covetousness. You may need to study it. All right? Number 3, do you have the right perspective about life? Do you have the right perspective about life? The right perspective about life is understanding that life consists of more than what you possess. Do you have the right perspective on life? The right viewpoint of life? Do you tie life to what you own, to what you can buy, to securing a better future for your family? So worried about money, so preoccupied about material things. Now, you should make wise decisions. No one's saying you shouldn't. No one. I'm not arguing that you shouldn't make wise decisions with your money. But when you're so preoccupied with all of that you're negating the spiritual, then I think your perspective on life is all messed up. Do you truly see the spiritual being a key element of what life is all about? All right. So number 1, don't let temporal matters blind you of spiritual truth. Number 2, beware of covetousness. Number 3, do you have the right perspective on life? And number 4. Are you laying up earthly treasure or spiritual treasure? Are you laying up earthly treasure or spiritual treasure? Now, there's a lot of ways for people to get around this. Well, I don't have a big bank account. I don't have all these houses, so I don't have much earthly treasure. Okay, you may be completely bankrupt earthly and still be bankrupt spiritually as well. Okay, you can just be living your life on this earth, making all kinds of wrong financial decisions. Okay, but you're not doing anything spiritually for yourself either. So, what does it look like? What does your physical account look like? Your physical treasures look like? Well, what does your spiritual treasures look like? Some people are just broke and both. We need some spiritual treasure being laid up. We need to be rich towards God, as the text says in verse 21 of Luke 12. All right, I'll stop there. I want to repeat them, but I will not repeat them. I'll stop right there. You can rewind the recording and listen. And if you're listening to the live broadcast, the recording of this will be posted almost immediately after I'm done speaking. All right. Now, that one was easy. Luke 12, 13 to 21, no problems. We don't have a problem at all. The next section is where our problems begin. Yes, the next section is where we're going to have problems because it seems to imply that, hey, you don't need to worry about what you're going to eat. You don't need to worry about what you're going to drink. Don't need to worry about what you're going to wear because God's going to provide all of that for you. Now that becomes a problem because if God is going to provide all of that for you, then how do I, how do anyone else explain that there are millions of people who do not have their basic necessities and millions of people die from starvation every single year on the very planet that you live on and I live on? People die every day from starvation. How does that happen if we have supposedly a promise that God is going to provide us food and clothing? All right. Now, I've heard all the explanations to try to get around it, but that's going to be the question that we're going to come into. Now, it makes perfect sense to go into verse 22 and following here, because he's telling the disciples here, hey, don't covet. Don't be preoccupied with the physical, because he comes around in verse 22 and following to seem to imply that God's going to take care of the physical. How do we understand that? That's going to lead us into our major problem, because he tells them in verse 22 and following, don't be concerned with the physical at all. I mean, you don't need to even worry about it, right? Because God's going to provide it. And then that leads right into him telling them to sell everything. Now we got to figure out how we apply this. All right, because many Christians claim the promise of God's going to provide everything. He's going to feed you. He's going to take care of you. Don't worry about it. He will supply all your needs. We quote that all the time as if it's a guarantee, ignoring the fact that millions of people starve to death every year and die, and we even try to come up with some way around it. But here's what's interesting. While we're claiming all of those promises in verse 22 and following, when we get to the sell all that you have part, we're like, nope, that doesn't count. Nope, doesn't apply. So that's where we're headed. That's the problem. Where I keep giving you the preview of where we are headed, but I'm trying to build each section and give us something to consider. All right, I'll stop there. There is Luke chapter 12. We've got a lot to work on. Now, in my message last night at Victory Baptist Church on Luther's Catechism on the fourth petition of the Lord's Prayer, give us this day our daily bread, I end that message with giving everyone some things to do, an exercise, to look up some statistics, to write out a solution, and to look up some scriptures. I would challenge you, even if you don't have time to listen to everything, go find that message that I preached last night, right? It's on the app, it's on Spreaker. Listen to it. And when you do, if you don't have time to listen to everything, fast forward to the last 15 minutes of it, and at least listen to the steps I want you to take and start working on those steps. If you work on those steps, email me at newsif@yahoo.com. Tell me what you have found. Members of Victory Baptist Church, you can obviously communicate with me 100 different ways. You know where I live. You know my phone number. You can chat with me live. There's lots of different things you can do. So, hey, let me know what you have discovered, because we really need... all of these issues are coming together. And now we can try to come up with a good biblical solution. All right, I will probably be back this evening with another live broadcast. If there's a subject, I will throw this out there. If there's any subject you want me to talk about tonight, any subject at all, if there's a theological question, doctrinal question, current event question, email me at newsif@yahoo.com, and maybe tonight we will do a broadcast about that. All right, everyone, have a great Thursday, August the 15th. Oh. Today is the what's called Assumption Day. If you do not know this, a little church history fact. This is the day that on this day, I believe it was 1950. Or no, I don't think it occurred on this day. This is the day that it's remembered. It was 1950. I think it was November when it actually was made a dogma. But this is the day that is called Assumption Day, where Catholics remember the dogma of the Assumption of Mary, body and soul, into heaven. All right. I do have a link to the document of the statement by the Pope at the time. I think it's Pope Pius. I don't know which Pope Pius it was. I'm doing this all from memory. I do have a document saved if you would like to read his reasoning for declaring the Assumption of Mary into heaven, body and soul as a dogma. You can read that just so that you should be, you put it this way, you should know the history of things that have been a part of Christianity, whether you refer to it as biblical Christianity or not biblical Christianity, it's still labeled as Christianity, and you should at least know what is happening. If you don't know the Assumption of Mary, some believe it traces all the way back to the 3rd and 4th century to some apocryphal writings. What apocryphal writings were used? What other church fathers spoke of anything that could be closely related to the Assumption of Mary? What scripture does the Catholic Church use to support the Assumption of Mary? Let me give you a hint. It's found in the book of Revelation. You should know these things, be able to engage intelligently about these subjects. So yes, today is called Assumption Day, and you should at least be familiar with all of that. All right. Okay, I just kicked my dog in the face by accident. Good thing he didn't bark at me. All right, I was walking across the room and there he was laying in the floor. All right, I'm going to stop and